OpenAI has completed its long anticipated restructuring. They officially converted from a capped profit model into a traditional for-profit company and have set the stage now, according to some reports we're hearing, of having one of the largest IPOs in tech history. So, as part of this completed transition from a nonprofit to a for-profit company, Microsoft has actually taken a 27% ownership stake in OpenAI. So they've kind of resolved their next chapter of their partnership there. And they have also extended their exclusive access to OpenAI's models through 2032. And basically, this move, now that it's completed, ends OpenAI's hybrid nonprofit structure. That was originally, they said, designed to balance public benefit with investor returns. CEO Sam Altman said this change ensures the company can scale safely while pursuing its mission to benefit humanity. So basically, with the nonprofit owning stakes in OpenAI, they say that would be the most well-resourced nonprofit in history, but then it frees them up to actually go raise a bunch of capital. Some observers, like investor and podcast host Jason Calacanis, who we've talked about a lot in the All In podcast, argues that this is like just a cynical business strategy to like start out as a nonprofit and get tax advantages and then switch to a for-profit structure. But regardless, transitioning away from the nonprofit model likely clears the way for OpenAI to go public. Reuters reports that OpenAI is already preparing for an IPO that could value the company at up to $1 trillion. So, Paul, we've been talking about this on and off for months, if not a year now. The deed is done. Like, what do you think? Was this, maybe give us some more details on like what the structure is going to look like? Like, was this necessary given how they started off as a nonprofit, then evolved into this like incredibly successful consumer company, or is this more of a cynical play like some of the critics are saying?
Yeah, I mean, it is essential to raise the kind of money they want to raise. So this is like Elon Musk's big beef with Sam, and it was funny because they had a Twitter interaction on Sunday
Yeah.
where Elon was again accusing him of basically stealing all this, and Sam was replying like, "You tried to take it all and put it into Tesla. Like, can't we just move on with our lives?" Basically. So there was a number of dominoes that needed to fall for this to happen. We've talked about them again over the last year, but in episode 167 in September, the memorandum of understanding between OpenAI and Microsoft had been signed. So at that time, it said OpenAI and Microsoft have signed a non-binding memorandum of understanding for the next phase of our partnership. We are actively working to finalize contractual terms in a definitive agreement. Together, we remain focused on delivering the best AI tools for everyone, grounded in our shared commitment to safety. So Microsoft's tentative blessing gave OpenAI the green light it needed to present its for-profit restructuring plan to state regulators, because they also needed the attorney generals from California and Delaware to
Mm.
bless the plans. So again, if you're kind of new to all of this, Microsoft has invested about $13 billion into OpenAI, and they could absolutely have been a blocker in allowing this to happen. But Microsoft obviously stands to benefit from this happening as well. And then if we rewind back to May of 2025 on episode 147, that's when Sam had published a letter to employees saying this is the direction we're going. So in that letter called Evolving OpenAI Structure, he said OpenAI was founded as a nonprofit and is today overseen and controlled by that nonprofit. Going forward, it will continue to be overseen and controlled by that nonprofit. Our for-profit LLC, which has been under the nonprofit since 2019, will transition to a public benefit corporation, which is a purpose-driven company structure that has to consider the interests of both shareholders and the mission. The nonprofit will control and also be a large shareholder in the PBC, giving the nonprofit better resources to support many benefits. Our mission remains the same, and the public benefit corporation will have the same mission. So that is what happened. So they obviously, as of May, were sort of on this path. They needed Microsoft's blessing. They needed the attorney general's blessing. I did see a note last night from the Financial Times that said the Delaware attorney general has made it very clear that she is willing to take legal action against OpenAI, that if they do not live up to the public benefit corporation, if they don't put the interest of society ahead of their profits, that basically for her to agree to this, Sam had to make legally binding concessions about what they were going to do.
Yeah.
And so that is something to watch. I would not be shocked at all if they kind of fall short of what the Attorney General believes to be the expectations. It does pave the way for the IPO. One thing to factor in is OpenAI is losing an insane amount of money. So we got our first real look at what might be those losses based on Microsoft's earnings reports from last week. So Microsoft owns 27% of OpenAI as of the restructuring of this. It stands to reason under equity accounting, so this is from the Register, that it bears 27% of OpenAI's losses. Microsoft's admission in its earnings reports that it shaved 3.1 billion off its net income to account for its share of OpenAI losses, therefore suggests OpenAI lost about 11.5 billion during the quarter.
Mhm.
So if we just played that out times 4, they're losing like 40-50 billion this year. So the losses are mounting, but it's more about what they want to do from here. And if they can get toward 100 billion annually in revenue, even if we're forward looking 100 billion, they could in theory go through IPO at $1 trillion valuation. And just for context, that would make them, as of this morning, the 11th largest company in the world, 12th
Wow.
largest company in the world. So JP Morgan Chase is 846 billion, Walmart's 800 billion, Eli Lilly 773, Oracle 748,
Mm.
Visa 658. So they would be right at the level of Berkshire Hathaway, which as of this morning is just over 1 trillion. Tesla's 1.5, TSMC 1.5, and then you got Meta, Saudi Aramco, Broadcom, Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, Nvidia. And only Amazon, Google, Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, Nvidia are over 2 trillion. I mean, we're talking about, and at the scale they're going, you're looking
Yeah.
at that kind of escape velocity of getting to 2 trillion probably within 18 to 24 months. So this matters. Like, this is a very significant company. And then, Mike, the one thing I'll just kind of wrap here with my thoughts. I did listen on the flight here to the BG2 podcast. So this is
Yeah.
Brad Gerstner. You I think mentioned him. So he sat down. Honestly, it was a very awkward interview. It was Satya Nadella from Microsoft and Sam Altman. And Brad is an investor in both, I assume, but I know he's a big investor. His company's a big investor in OpenAI. So it was talking about this restructuring, their agreement, things like that. And it got really awkward. So to Brad's credit, like he was asking hard questions and Sam was not happy about it. Like he did not hide it well. So a couple quick notes, and I would suggest people go listen to the whole episode. It is a fascinating listen. So they talk about AGI. So if anybody's been following along for the last couple of years, one of the big stipulations in the Microsoft OpenAI deal is that it's basically voided if OpenAI achieves AGI. And historically, the OpenAI board dictated when that occurred. So Microsoft's access to OpenAI's tools, technology, all these things was contingent on an agreement of what AGI is, basically. So Brad says, given that both exclusivity and the rev share and early in the case AGI is verified, it seems to make AGI a pretty big deal. As I understand it, if OpenAI claimed AGI, it sounds like it goes to an expert panel and you guys basically select a jury who's got to make a relatively quick decision whether or not AGI has been reached. And this is Brad still. Satya, you said on yesterday's earning call that nobody's even close to getting to AGI and you don't expect it to happen anytime soon. You talked about the spiky and jagged intelligence. Sam, I've heard you perhaps sound a little bit more bullish on when we might get to AGI. So I guess the question is to you both, do you worry that over the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to end up having to call in the jury to effectively make a call on whether or not we've hit AGI? Sam, I realize you've got to try and make some drama between us here. I think putting a process in place for this is a good thing to do. I expect that the technology will take several surprising twists and turns, and we will continue to be good partners to each other and figure out what makes sense. That was a non-answer. So Satya then says, well said, Sam. And that's one of the reasons why I think the process we put in place is a good one. And at the end of the day, I'm a big believer in the fact that intelligence capability is going to continue to improve. And so Sam now starts to sound annoyed. And this is pretty early in the interview. And obviously we got a complete non-answer from both of them as to like what AGI is. And like, again, it's like a really fundamental thing. So then Brad says, so he kind of switches gears. OpenAI is one of the fastest growing companies in history. Satya, you said on the pod a year ago, that the BG2 pod, that every new phase shift creates a new Google, and the Google of this phase shift is already known, and it's OpenAI. And none of this would have been possible had you guys not made those huge bets. With all that said, OpenAI's revenues are still reported at 13 billion in 2025, with we now know a loss of probably 40 to 50 billion. And Sam, on your live stream this week, you talked about this massive commitment to compute, 1.4 trillion over the next 4 or 5 years, with big commitments from 500 million to Nvidia. So this is OpenAI spending this kind of money with these other companies. 300 million to AMD and Oracle, 250 billion to, did I say 300 billion? Yeah, I think that's supposed to be billion. 250 billion to Azure. So I think the single biggest question I've heard all week hanging over the market is, how can the company with 13 billion in revenues make 1.4 trillion of spend commits? And you've heard the criticism, Sam. Sam is now visibly pissed. Like I watched this clip on YouTube and then I listened to it on the flight here. He's very upset. And so he says, we're doing well more revenue than that, first of all. Second of all, Brad, if you want to sell your shares, I'll find you a buyer. Enough. I think there's a lot of people who would love to buy OpenAI shares. I don't think you want to sell. Let's see, these people who talk with a lot of breathless concern about our compute and stuff that would be thrilled to buy shares. So I think we could sell your shares or anybody else's to some of the people who are making the most noise on Twitter, whatever, about this very quickly. We do plan the revenue to grow sharply. And then he starts talking about the revenue takeoff and how it's actually probably way more than the 13 billion. And so it started getting just super uncomfortable. Sam's obviously very upset. Brad is sort of like, if you're watching his facial emotions, like, oh man, I kind of hit the hornet's nest on this one. And then he tries to backtrack. Satya steps in to try to diffuse the situation, basically saying, hey, I've never looked at a business plan that they haven't beaten. Like, hey, I would believe in Sam, kind of thing. I thought Sam was going to bounce from the interview right then. He ends up dropping a little later on. He stuck around for another 20 minutes. But then they got into the IPO. And so now Sam's still, obviously not enjoying this interview. Brad says, Sam, Reuters was reporting yesterday that OpenAI may be planning to go public late 26 or 27. Sam, no, we don't have anything specific. I'm a realist. I assume it'll happen someday. I don't know where people write these reports. I don't have a date in mind. Brad said, but it does seem if you guys were doing in excess of 100 billion in revenue in 28 or 29, that you would at least be an option. And Sam said, how about 27? So he's basically like, I'm like, they might have moved up their timelines to get that number. So I do think that there's a chance that if by, late 2026, they're showing a trajectory that would get them to that 100 billion number in 2027, you could see an IPO in 2026 still. It seems like 27 is maybe more likely, but it does certainly seem inevitable that they would IPO.
Yeah, I saw that interview blowing up on X
Wow.
for how awkward.
Well, and Brad even tweeted like, hey, people are misreading the situation. It was actually joked about it after. I was like, no, man, he's pissed. Like, you can't watch that and not think that. Almost to the point where I could almost imagine they get on that call and Brad's like, hey, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about this. And Sam's like, I don't really want to talk about that. And then Brad asked anyway. That was the vibe you get from it.